First one, if it, I'd like to ask, as a former member of this committee, the representative at large from the great state of Montana, Mr. Denny Rehberg, to talk about H.R. 845, the Montana Land Sovereignty Act. Congressman Rehberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before he leaves, I'd like to thank Senator Hatch. This is the second time I've appeared next to him. The most recent was on the issue of wolves, and we were successful in getting that through the Congress and signed by the President. I hope we're successful on this piece of legislation as well. I just might point out I did have to show him how to turn on the mic, so I've done my duty as a House member teaching the Senate today. Chairman Bishop, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify here on behalf of my legislation, the Montana Land Sovereignty Act. I'm reminded of a Greek myth about a guy named Damocles. Damocles was forced to sit on a king's chair beneath a huge sword. The sword hangs from its handle above his head by a single hair of a horse's tail. Damocles is constantly aware of the sword's presence. He's miserable. For Montanans, the Antiquities Act is something like the sword of Damocles. Like the myth, we must cope with the constant knowledge that one day we could wake up to find that with the stroke of a pen, the President declared their backyard a national monument. For us, it's no myth. In the 11th hour of the outgoing Clinton administration, the Antiquities Act was used, some say abused, to create the Upper Missouri Breaks National Monument, despite strong opposition across my home state of Montana. The Montana Land Sovereignty Act isn't about stopping new monuments. It's simply about making sure that the American public has a voice in the process. We were left out in 2001. 10 years later, history is repeating itself. By now, you've heard about the not-for-release Department of Interior memo that recommends millions of acres of new national monuments, including 2.5 million acres in Montana. While the Department of Interior has downplayed the memo, wrote that, thank you, Wally, the emails show detailed discussions that went into brainstorming for the plan. The Great Falls Tribune read the documents and concluded that the rumors started at the top levels of the Interior Department agencies. And all of this happened in secret. The only reason we found out was because the documents were leaked. We got lucky this time. We had time to weigh in, and the opposition to the plan is clear at the town hall meetings I hosted, on the billboards, bumper stickers, and road signs across the state. But for all that opposition, the President could still act on those secret plans at any time, and that's just wrong. When we go back and look at the original House and Senate reports from 1906, the debate was about archaeology and protecting Native American ruins from looters. When it passed, this bill's strongest support came from the Archaeological Institute of America, the American Anthropological Association, and the Smithsonian Institution. The Antiquities Act was never meant to circumvent Congress and designate huge parcels of land as national monuments. In fact, this question was directly considered during the debate. On June 5th, 1906, Mr. Stevens of Texas asked on the House floor if the Antiquities Act could be used to tie up large parcels of land. The bill's sponsor assures him, quote, "Certainly not. The object is entirely different. It is to preserve these old objects of special interest and the Indian remains in the Pueblos in the Southwest." I have the testimony. I'd like to have it entered into the record, if I might, without objection.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I didn't introduce the Montana Land Sovereignty Act to undermine the intent of the Antiquities Act. On the contrary, my legislation restores this valuable law to its original intention, that is history, on the preservation of American antiquities. But the Montana Land Sovereignty Act is also about protecting the American people from the unchecked, unaccountable expansion of the Antiquities Act power. Consider this. In one of the leaked memos, the BLM recommends using the Antiquities Act to designate monuments, and I quote, "should the legislative process not prove fruitful." In other words, if the people say no, unelected bureaucrats will do it anyway. But in the state of Wyoming and Alaska, presidential designations of large national monuments must be ratified by Congress. For those states, BLM lays out a different policy recommendation. I quote, "The BLM also recommends that the administration begin a dialogue with Congress to encourage the conservation of these areas." That's the approach Montanans deserve, dialogue instead of a top-down federal mandate. Under current law, Congress must approve any national monument designation in Wyoming and in parts of Alaska. My common sense bill simply establishes the same requirement of congressional approval for new national monuments in Montana. With your support in this committee, We can restore the Antiquities Act to its intended purpose. More importantly, we can restore the power to govern in this country to the people. That's where it belongs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.